Hey there, group leaders. It is Eric and Brenton coming at you from the GCC studios live. Um, we want to have a conversation about COVID regulations as a state. We are now in phase 3. So we just wanted to kind of ask the question, what does that mean? What does that mean for us as a church? And what should we do moving forward? So Brenton, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, what are the shifts that have kind of been made?
Yeah, so when pandemic hits and we go into lockdown back in March, we as a church and as groups made two shifts from larger gatherings to smaller groups. Even within our small groups, we went from large small groups to smaller
Yeah,
groups.
right.
And then we went from in-person to virtual relationships. Everything went from in-person to virtual. So when we were at the bottom of the V before the uptick, we made those two shifts, and it was small groups, and we were only pretty much exclusively
Mhm.
meeting virtually. Now, as we move from phase 1, which is a lockdown, now according to the state, our state is in phase 3. We're shifting back. We're shifting from smaller to larger groups and from virtual back to in-person gathering. So how do we do that? How do we do that wisely? And what does that mean? That's what we want to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess what does that mean for us as a church, and what does that mean for our groups?
Right. So as a church, we're not in phase 3 yet officially. For our groups, though, there are some implications of our state being in phase 3 that give us some freedom, that give us some more flexibility.
Mhm.
So as a church, we're still in phase 2, like in terms of our building and our policies and practices for how we're using the building and a lot of other things. For groups, what it means is gatherings outside up to 250 people and gatherings in homes up to 50 people. That's now on the table. So we can start to pursue those with caution and with wisdom. So what that actually means is that we're in phase 3 right now, but the state and we are watching that as numbers continue to grow of new cases, which was expected. We may have to pull back and go back into phase 2, or maybe even back down into lockdown like some states have had to. So we want to move forward cautiously, not just run everything wide open. But we want to start to evaluate, okay, what does this mean? Can we start to meet in person again in some new ways? Can we start to meet in smaller and then maybe increasingly larger groups? And I think the answer to that is yes, with caution and with
Sure,
wisdom, still practicing the state's social distancing guidelines.
sure. I think that brings up a good point too, because there is a lot of freedom with the regulations the way they are right now. And I think it's going to be really, really important, especially now that we're communicating with our groups, just so that we know where people are at. Are people comfortable gathering inside spaces? Are some people not comfortable having food? Find out where people are at so that we can get creative with our group gatherings. We've heard some really cool stories of people getting creative, whether they're meeting in the backyard, in a park, some people being socially distant and having no food. But yeah, I think just communication and creativity are going to be key moving forward for
Yeah,
us.
definitely. And so two practices guide us as leaders: communicate, and be creative. And be
Yeah.
creative. Yeah.
So, what are some passages of scripture that we can kind of look to as we're kind of moving forward and being sensitive to where people are at? What are some passages of scripture that can help us as we
Yeah,
navigate
so
this?
I think there are two passages. So if there's two practices, communicate and be creative, then there are two passages. And one is Hebrews chapter 10, where the writer says, "Do not neglect gathering together as some are in the habit of doing, but all the more gather as you see the day approaching." So the question is, just because the state's in phase 3 doesn't mean that we run and foolhardy embrace all of the potential freedoms that come with that. But if we're asking the question, do we gather? Yes, like
Yeah.
we gather because what we stand to gain by continuing to gather, but even if it's still virtually, what we stand to gain by gathering is far more than we stand to gain by not gathering. What we think we gain from not gathering, freedom, rest, downtime, whatever, is nothing compared to what we gain when we do gather. What we get when the Spirit of Jesus ministers to us through His people as we gather in the context of Christian community is, I mean, it's really immeasurable. And so gather, yes, gather all the more, especially in a pandemic.
Mhm.
Gather when we can. And then so I think the second passage would be Romans chapter 12, which is where we were a couple of weeks ago as we looked at where God's leading us as a church. It's where we were a couple of years ago when we first merged. Our very first series as a newly merged church here on the corner of Rivermont and Bedford Avenues was in the book of Romans chapters 12, verses 9 through 13. And so I wanted to read Eugene Peterson's translation of this in the Message. And this was in our guide to gathering and social isolation guide that we put out back in early April. And this still rings true for us today. So this is the spirit that we want to move forward with in these days. So Eugene Peterson's translation says, "Love from the center of who you are. Don't fake it. Run for dear life from evil. Hold on for dear life to good. Be good friends, even family, who love one another deeply. Learn to play second fiddle. Don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled and aflame. Be alert servants of the Master, cheerfully expectant. Don't quit in hard times. Instead, pray all the more. Help needy Christians and be inventive or creative in hospitality." That's a spirit we want to embrace as we move forward, cautiously, carefully, but also enjoying the new freedoms, loving one another deeply, gathering, remembering what we stand to gain when we seek Jesus and practice the way of Jesus together in community.
Mm-hmm. That is super helpful. Thank you so much for that. And guys, we love you. We hope this is helpful. We know it's not all encompassing. It doesn't touch on everything, but hopefully it kind of helps you as you're thinking and navigating through group gatherings. I know it's been a challenging season, so hopefully this is a blessing to you. We love you guys, and we're praying for you.